My name is Ann Friend. I am with Merrimack Regional Planning Commission out of St. James, Missouri. We are the Regional Planning Commission. We cover 8 counties in the area, so we cover Crawford, Dent, Gasconade, Marys, Osage, Phelps, Pulaski, and Washington counties. So there are 19 RPCs around the state, covering the entire state as well as the city's metropolitan organizations. So just really quick, this is a workshop. I'm here to try and give you some information, some background, but I am obviously not an end-all, be-all decision maker. I'm just here to provide some information. So do a quick introduction, go over the purpose of planning and zoning, do a map review. I'm going to go through the zoning code recommendations that I sent to Sally and Jared. It's been about a year. And then we'll have open discussion. So the goal is for me to get through my presentation, and then we will have questions and go back and discuss things. So just to let you know a little bit about me, I do have a Bachelor of Science from what is now Missouri State. I'm aging myself. I have a Master's of Regional and Community Planning in 2005 from Kansas State. I am an American Institute of Certified Planner since 2008. I was a city planner in previous life in Florida, and then was a planner for over 9 years in St. Charles, Missouri since 2000. So I've been a planner since 2005 professionally. I've been at MRPC since 2016. I am from St. James, so I finally moved home, and I've been the planning department manager since 2019. So not that this is any specifically important or relevant, but just to let you know, I do have a background in planning and have worked for local government for several years. So what's the general purpose of the Planning and Zoning Commission? It's to promote orderly growth, protect community interests. In planning, you learn about police powers, which promotes health, safety, and the general welfare of a community. That's something that you see in lots of literature. Specifically to Salem, Chapter 400 is your zoning code of ordinances. And for the Planning and Zoning Commission specifically, it basically says that your duties are to perform all functions of Chapter 89 of the revised Missouri State Statutes. You develop and update zoning ordinances, review development proposals and land use changes, and you advise City Council on planning matters. Those are all things that the code relates to, as well as Chapter 89 of the Missouri State Statutes. Long-term benefits for the P&Z or economic development. You ensure property value stability, maintaining that neighborhood character and appeal. You provide the ability for public involvement, so you give residences the chance to speak on matters, and it helps build resiliency. So why does it matter, though? So planning and zoning commissions matter because it helps with smart growth. It helps prevent urban sprawl, encourages sustainable development, and when you say sustainable, that doesn't necessarily have to mean environmentally related, but you're not hop, skipping, and jumping projects. It allows for infrastructure alignment related to roads, schools, utilities, environmental protection. It helps preserve green spaces, ecologically sensitive areas if that's applicable. And the one thing I wanted to touch on specifically, and I listed it as community safety, but it really is, it's ensuring proper placement of those specific uses, whether it be residential or commercial or industrial. That a lot of times relates to the zoning map, and so the best example would be something like protections from spot zoning. So spot zoning, as an example, is if you have the small text, I understand you may not be able to read. It is in your PowerPoint, but this is specifically from Chapter 89 of state statutes. And it basically says if you're going to have zoning, you should have a comprehensive plan, and then you should adopt codes and zoning maps and whatnot in conjunction or based on that comprehensive plan for the city, so that if a developer comes into town, they know what they're supposed to do. And so in the state statute, this one specifically, it relates to zoning ordinance amendments. There's a court case that basically says, there was a gas station that somebody wanted to come in and rezone to commercial amidst a bunch of multifamily residential. And it went to court, and the court said, no, that's a spot zoning. You've got, you know, a large area of multifamily. You can't just because I want to put in a gas station doesn't mean that's the right thing to do. So that's just an example that, you know, the purpose of the P&Z Commission is to help prevent some of those things. The purpose of this meeting and the work that we've been doing over the past couple of years with the city has been to help the city get to functional, if that makes any sense. So we'll go through that, and I'll try and explain some of it. So why are we here today? That map, I did not print it out, and again, on the screen it's hard to see, but that is your 1987 zoning map. So technically, without having any new maps adopted, if somebody came to the city 10 years ago, 20 years ago, that was the only paper map that was available. At the time in 87, you only had a residential district, a commercial district, and an industrial district. There was no breakdown in any of those. There was no agricultural designation. And while we have a list of ordinances and annexations and zoning amendments since that time, they've never been put to paper. In November of 1994, I went back and checked the code today. The city council, I'm sure the P&Z Commission at that time, also made amendments to the code. So didn't change the map, but in the code, you adopted section 405, which is residential districts, and that broke down to R1, R2, and R3, as well as identifying commercial districts, which, while there's still only one commercial district in the zoning code, it references a C1 neighborhood commercial and a C2 general commercial, but there's no actual zoning classifications for that. And then it also, probably in name, amended it to be manufacturing/industrial district, and then also established an agricultural district. So you have this map with 3 designations, but technically in your code you have at least 6 designations in the written code. So there's discrepancies immediately. This is where we'll kind of get into the map review. So digitizing that black and white map, this is what you end up with. So the yellow is residential, the red is commercial, and the purple is industrial. That is what the zoning was established in 1987. I will tell you these colors are standard map colors for zoning, so I didn't just randomly pick the colors. But that is what, again, based on the 87 map, if you took that black and white, that's what this would essentially show. So what we did, so we knew, again, we digitized this. This was the first step. Then my planners in my department and my intern a couple summers ago, went out and did an existing land use survey. Now, this is a windshield survey, so we weren't going into buildings. We weren't walking into somebody's backyard because we didn't want to have to knock on doors. But this was driving by, walking by on the sidewalk, identifying general uses of what the property is, not zoning, what it's being used for. And I do recognize that some of these designations may be slightly off, but in a general sense, like as commercial, for example, if you have outdoor storage of giant tires and equipment, that's usually light industrial. That's not a commercially considered use from a zoning standpoint, usually. So if you see something like that, like, well, I think that's commercial, technically, I mean, this is just what we saw, but that is how we designated things. Anything that's gray on the map is identified as vacant. So whether something's been torn down or it's just open space. We did this based on parcels. So a parcel is what's showing up based on the county's assessor's map. So when you go and look at the assessor's map, it'll show properties. A lot and or property is not always one and the same as a parcel. So just to clarify, for example, let's see if this works. There might be, for example, down here in this industrial area, there might be multiple lots that were subdivided, for example, but if it's all under one ownership and there's no building on it, for example, the assessor's going to show it as all one parcel. So just to clarify that, it might be one parcel, but in reality, it's multiple lots. So colors on this, again, yellow is single family, pink is agricultural, the orange color is a duplex or two-family unit, brown is multifamily, so anything above 2 units. Commercial is red, industrial is purple still, institutional is blue, so schools, schools, churches, secondary education, et cetera. And then green is parks and recreational areas. So that is how, and then anything in white is unincorporated, so unincorporated Denton County. Again, this is what we could observe as we drove by or walked by the properties. So what we did after this is we took the old map, we looked at the existing land use map, and we thought about potential, either your existing zoning designations and or potential zoning designations that maybe don't exist yet, and came up with a recommendation. This is just that. It is just a recommendation based on what we saw, what existing uses were there. Generally speaking, again, to prohibit things like spot zoning and or keeping uses consistent near each other. If there was a property that we saw that really, you could tell it's going to be that way forever. So, like as an example, generally speaking, this, let's see if it's going to work. Well, my battery's died. But there's multifamily up here in the right. It's kind of a triangular shaped parcel. That multifamily isn't going anywhere anytime soon that we could tell. So it made sense, and it's near other residential. It's almost a transition from that red commercial to that yellow single family, so we left it as multifamily. As an example, again, this is just our recommendations. This is not something that the city has to adopt. What I suggest from a process standpoint is that you all as a group continue to spend time looking at this, but you do, from a professional standpoint, you do want to stay away from the hop, skip, and the jump type zoning. I'll get into it when we talk about the code here in a minute. But if you were, let's just say you were to adopt this map as is, and one of those, so what we recommended was actually creating a neighborhood business district, which are usually lower intensive commercial uses. So not your car dealerships, not your heavy auto repair, but neighborhood shops, stores, retail, office space. So let's say there is an auto shop with outdoor storage in the middle of that blue area, just as an example. There's nothing to, what you need to do is, with any type of code amendment like this, you would adopt what's called a non-conforming regulation or clause in your code. It's generally referred to as a grandfathered clause. So if you looked at this map and the city said, yes, this is what we want to adopt, and Joe Citizen has that auto shop smack dab in the middle of neighborhood commercial, that's not saying that he has to go away. It's saying that if that land use changes in the future, it needs to be compliant with the zoning that's on that property, but it's not necessarily, generally speaking, anytime you adopt, if you would adopt a large-scale land use amendment like this, all of those uses there that are existing as is can stay there until they vacate. Right now, you don't have a really good, or you don't have a nonconformity clause in your code, but as a part of an amendment to adopting a map and to adopting a code, that's something that you would want to build in. So hopefully one that would, no matter what the end map ends up looking like, that would assuage some fears of you're going to adopt this new code on top of my property, and let's say, again, you have a use that's not consistent with the zoning that's going to be adopted. you have that non-conforming clause so that people can continue to operate their business. That's, again, this is a recommendation. So that yellow is single family, R1. The R2 is a two-family. Now, as it is right now, you can also have single family in the two-family zoning. And again, the way we adopted this was based on, you have a lot of single family in this area, but when you think about planning, you generally want to have a transition. So you have commercial uses, you kind of transition out, and you get kind of lesser away. So you don't want to have single family, commercial, single family, industrial, single family. You don't want to have kind of that sawtooth type zoning. So we looked at it, and so like as a core of the city, we thought, okay, at least having an R2 zoning designation where you could allow for some additional density and uses down, in the central part of the city would be possible while still also being able to keep your single family. R3, which again you have in your written code right now, is that brown color. That doesn't change. I don't know that we identified any properties that weren't already multifamily, but apartments, senior housing facilities, things like that oftentimes fall in that multifamily zoning. Again, we did recommend that you actually adopt a neighborhood business district and then a separate commercial district, or you call it general commercial, whatever you would choose to do. But like I said before, that neighborhood business district is generally speaking kind of a lower intensive use, the corner market near my residential areas. And that, again, this, you could even call it a central business district. Some towns, some communities that have zoning call it a CBD, a central business district. So it's really open there as to what that could be. Again, commercial is kind of your any and all commercial uses, industrial, the same, and then adding in what we call agriculture, which some communities have agriculture zoning, some don't. Understanding that we're in a rural area, so if you have large areas of land that remain vacant, or maybe is it the sewer plant that's up north there, that makes sense that would maybe be in an ag zoning with that open space around it. But again, and I will say it 90 times, 1, I'm not a land use attorney. 2, this is just a recommendation. It's a recommendation to consider that moving forward, and I'll get into some of the code recommendations here in a minute, but when you think about adopting zoning maps and adopting regulations, I know a lot of people bristle at that or they think it's going to restrict their ability to do business or to what they can do to their home. But creating some of that conformity in development helps the city plan for things. It helps aesthetically. It helps people look at your community and go, that makes sense as to why this is that way, or, it's really, it provides some regulation, because I will tell you, as an outsider from the city of Salem right now, if I was a developer and I came into the community, I would be a little confused as to what I could or couldn't do looking at the code. So I'm going to go into the word sections. Again, it's going to be a little hard to see because there's a lot of comments, but I did want to go through my full list. So I will say these are general code recommendations for the most part. I didn't try to get too specific. Like, I didn't write up a whole neighborhood business district code. So I made comments like, you maybe need to create a neighborhood business district. I did not tell you what that looks like. So some general comments. And if you want to, when we get to open discussion and we want to go back, I do have the code book, the online code book pulled up so we can go to these specific sections. But, the first comment is really, does the city want to leave the designations as is in the code book, or do you want to create additional districts? And that was where, my MRPC's recommendation or my recommendations of creating that neighborhood business or in general commercial thinking about what those designations would be. So that's first and foremost. You have to decide what zoning districts you want to establish. Second, you really, with a new code amendments, you really have to work on the definition section of the code. And the only reason I say that is it's going to help the city employees, it's going to help the Planning and Zoning Commission, it's going to help a citizen that when they want to do something on a property and it says guest house, as an example, or whatever, they can go to the code and see what the definition of guest house is. Is it a B&B? Is it a short-term rental like Airbnb? You know, like the importance of definitions is going to help you not only operate from the city perspective, it's going to help you legally too. And I guess I should start it with this. Cleaning up your code is going to, if you had a litigious developer come into the city and you as the Planning and Zoning Commission looked at this development and said, we don't really like this, we don't think this is appropriate, but nothing in your code really prohibited them from doing what they want to do, you have no legal ground. Well, again, I'm not an attorney, so I will clarify that, but you generally don't have legal standing to deny them that approval, because if the code allows them to do it, the code allows them to do it, and that's a weakness in the code, not necessarily in their proposal. Does that make sense? Okay, so I just want to clarify, that's kind of where, I mean, if there was like a health and safety concern, that's one thing, but if it was a setback or a sign design and you're like, I don't like that sign design, if the code allows it, there's nothing really to say they can't do that. The consideration, another comment is landscape and design regulations. So you don't really have landscaping regulations. I know some commercial developers will, again, bristle at that, but in larger cities, I think even in Rolla, but you have generally, you might have one, like for parking areas, if you have parking along the perimeter for a commercial business, you have one tree per 50 lineal feet and one shrub per 5 feet, or one shrub per 10 feet, or something like that, because you're trying to beautify your community, you're trying to beautify property. So that is something to consider. Design regulations, most of the time you don't see residential design regulations, you see commercial design regulations. So again, this is up to you all, but you could have anything from in commercial districts or in the C1 district, or your neighborhood business, no metal buildings, or 50% of the facade has to be a masonry product or something like that. Now I will tell you, having worked for the city of St. Charles for over 9 years, we had 75% of the facade of the entire structure had to be masonry, brick, stone or brick, could not be block. You can be very strict. You don't have to be, but that's an example of how far you can go. So it's a consideration, right? When you're adopting codes, you can baby step this. You can just try and get your zoning codes established, or your zoning designations established, and adopt the map, and then move into some of these things like landscape or design regulations. But these are things to consider. You really need a separate sign code. So right now, as it is in the code, you have some signage regulations. For the most part, they're tied to the zoning district. Generally speaking, from the court's perspective, many a sign code has been stricken down because zoning or sign codes are trying to regulate content. And from a legal standpoint, you can generally only regulate time, manner, and place. So you can tell them where they can put it, you can tell them how they put it there, and you can tell them, like, if it's how long they can have it up. So if it's a temporary sign like those, I call them D flags, or the open flags, or whatever it might be. You can, pennant flags. You can tell them how long they can have it out there. It can be no more than a week, or a month, a year, within the year. But you can't tell them what can be on it for the most part. That I will say, sign codes, in my professional experience, sign codes above anything else are what you oftentimes see people battling. And cities tend to lose if they have adopted regulations that really regulate any type of content. So, so that's something to consider. I really think you need to pull those sign codes out of your zoning districts and have a standalone sign code. And then this is one thing, and I don't know if you all have come across this, but you need to clarify, and again, this ties to definitions, and narrow down between the extra uses in the code. So right now you have written in your code reviewed uses, special uses, and conditional uses. What I think it's meant to be is like reviewed uses, or just like if you meet X, Y, and Z condition, it's a permitted use. And a conditional use or a special use is you're required to meet X, Y, and Z, but you also have to go to the P&Z Commission and City Council or Board of Aldermen to get approval for that. But there's too much overlap between the different zoning designations in the code now, where some places it says reviewed, some places it says special. I really, huh? I have, again, in my experience, and I can only speak to my experience, I've never seen 3 different, or even 2 different designations. I've seen, you have permitted uses, which are outright permitted, and maybe they have a minimum, you know, it might say, I don't know, office space with a minimum of 3,000 square feet. I'm making that up. But that's just a part of the permitted uses. So generally you have permitted uses and you have conditional or special use, whatever you want to call them, and that requires you to go before the board, before this committee, and then before the Board of Aldermen. But you don't have 3 separate special uses. And again, that's a definition importance. So that's another, like, kind of an overall comment for the whole zoning code. You need to clarify that because it is a little confusing. It's not a little confusing, it's a lot confusing. And then also a separate parking code. So it's part of the zoning code, but again, I do think it's important to consider parking based on uses and square footage or floor area of a space. And again, like the sign code, that's a separate code, so it spells out all the different uses, so people don't have to try and go into each designation to figure out what's allowed, what's not. There are ways to write a parking code that gives businesses in the downtown that have no parking on their property, you know, the ability, some exemptions and waivers and whatnot. And right now, I think the way it's written is if it's an existing building, let me back up. If you have a business that has a public parking within 300 feet, I believe is the way it's written, then you don't have to provide parking on site. But there's no definition spelled out in this part of the code where those parking lots are, those public parking lots. And it doesn't also, I could not find anything really where, like, a new business, like you have an existing property, it's not been annexed, but like Walmart comes in and there's no calculation to say for large box retail or whatever, you have to have this amount of parking spaces. Of course, Walmart's going to want 1,000 parking spaces, but you know, there might be somebody that's like, I only want to do 10. And then there's also limitations. I did not really come across anything that references, and maybe I missed it, ADA accessibility and the standards you have to provide for, you know, it's usually 1 handicap parking space per 25 or whatever it might be, et cetera. So again, I'm not telling you how to write it, but I do think you need a separate parking code. So those are the general comments. I am going to go through some of these quickly. So anytime you see the numbers, so 405 is the zoning code section. This first one is just, that's that specific code section you'll need to edit based on the zoning districts that you adopt. Number 2, again, this relates to the new zoning map adoption, so that would need to be updated. I'm going to pull up, you guys, I'm going to pull up the code really quick. So, let's see, 405. Sorry, it's a little slow. Okay. So when I say, again, we talked about addressing this. Oh, okay, so again, this number 3, yeah, when I say it's a little vague and up to interpretation, that's that conditional use permit application review. Again, that's clarifying between conditional, reviewed, et cetera. The 070, whoops, I think I actually must have that. Oh, that was my fault. It's not 070, it's .60B is what it should be. But this is just a comment. I think you have a relatively low application fee. It's just something to consider. You don't have to change it at all. It's just a recommendation. When you get further, section, oh, I've got to go to the next. When you get into 405.120, which these are permitted uses, again, this is, I'm getting more specific here. This is your R1 permitted uses. This is where it starts to get more confusing. You talk about conditional, you talk about reviewed use, et cetera. So again, just a clarification that you'll want to discuss, how do we want to regulate some of these businesses. The other thing is in the R1 code, the way it's listed is all non-residential permitted uses. So up here you have child nurseries, you have a hospital, temporary real estate offices. Those things, are oftentimes things you can see in an R1 zoning sometimes. They tend to be public or nonprofit uses, a lot of them, that if it's a non-residential use in a residential district, they tend to, like I said, they tend to be public or nonprofit. But for whatever reason, you also have art gallery listed, and that is oftentimes a for-profit use, so I wasn't quite sure of why an art gallery was allowed in R1. It's just something to consider. If we continue on to conditional uses, again, I'm just touching on the discrepancies between reviewed and conditional. There's also some reference in here to landscaping, but I do think it's a little left too much to interpretation. Trying to remember. It's been a year since I wrote all these comments out, but it's just trying to figure out. Let me go back. 405, 125. Like for example, here under the lodge halls, you have lodge halls as a conditional use, but then you have it as a reviewed use, and you have, this is what I'm referencing. Things like required parking will be landscaped to screen such use from adjoining properties. But there's no definition or code section that says what that is. So it ends up being left to interpretation of you all or the staff. And this committee may say, we think that's trees and shrubs, and in 5 years from now, a different group of individuals are going to say, no, that's not what I think it is. So again, clarifying that, cleaning that up. Let's continue. Do you all have your code books too, right? Okay. Let's see, in 4, when you talk about home occupations, it says, let me see where, I know I came across it, so let me just find this. Home occupations which do not create noise perceptible by a person of normal sensibilities within a residence. Again, left up too much to interpretation because your normal sensibilities certainly may be different from theirs. So again, these are the types of code amendments that need to be considered, cleaning up those definitions. The other consideration is sometimes, like right now, there's no restriction on how much of a residence can be used for a home occupation. So, some places that allow it say, no more than 25% of the square footage of the home can be used for that purpose. You don't have to do that, but that's a consideration, so you don't end up with somebody they're, doing, auto repair out of their home or something. Let's see. So the one thing, and when you talk about this, you have some regulations in R1 for mobile home dwellings. But I wanted to ask if there was consideration. So some places, again, Salem can do what it wants to. Some communities don't allow mobile homes as a standalone unit on a single-family lot. They allow, oftentimes they'll allow a manufactured home. So, they build it elsewhere, they come to the site and they erect it and put it on a permanent foundation. Some places have a mobile home zoning, or in the multifamily zoning, it allows for mobile home parks. So if you're going to allow a mobile home, it's in a mobile home park. But I do see often, and again, at your purview, but single-family zoning designations not allowing for what you traditionally think of as a standalone single mobile home trailer on a single-family lot. That's something to consider. Again, you don't have to do anything like that, but creating a mobile home district or creating that use within multifamily or whatnot might be a consideration. So under this section, this number 7 down here, vacation rentals, the question, and this is just a question, is has the city seen an influx of vacation rentals? And if so, is there consideration to allow those, to have a restriction on the number, or, right now it provides minimum lot standards for residential dwelling units, but it doesn't provide lot size standards for I'm jumping ahead. Is there a concern about it providing a density calculation or a distance requirement for vacation rental? So your Airbnbs, your Furbos. I don't know if Salem has a problem with these or not. I'm working on a comprehensive plan right now for the city of Herman. They definitely have a problem with this, and have looked at, some restrictions. But if you start to see a loss of ownership or even rental home, like long-term rental residences in the city, and they're being taken over by vacation homes, you may consider that you want to adopt a density standard or, limitation on where they're allowed. It's just a consideration, not required. But again, in some communities, we have seen where your lower income individuals even, somebody buys a fixer-upper, they turn it around, but they're renting it out short-term, or to these short-term rentals, and that's a loss of a good single-family home to an individual living in your city. So it's just, again, something to consider. Moving towards lot development, again, this is where I started to talk. You provide minimum lot standards for residential dwelling units. This also ties to Section 160, which is in the commercial designations. But you don't provide lot size standards for non-residential uses. So is the intent that non-residential uses in the R1 and R2 districts could be less than the minimum lot size of 7,200 square feet? Because this is, what's up here now is the R1 zoning district, as an example. The way you have design regulations is specific to minimum lot area per dwelling unit. So a residential district or a residential use has a lot size minimum. But in your commercial district or a commercial use in your residential district, there's nothing in here that says what size a lot might have to be for any of those other uses we talked about. So it's a consideration. Again, you usually want to adopt a lot size square footage for the zoning district, not based on the use, unless it's maybe some specific use where you need a lot of square footage. But Again, it's almost like a definition standpoint. If you took out the per dwelling unit and you just said the minimum lot area shall be 7,200 square feet in R1 or whatever, that would be easier to apply than not having anything for commercial. Again, it provides for setbacks of structures. So your codes, so in R1 and R2, provides for setbacks of structures in both of those districts. Says a corner yard setback minimum is 10 feet and an interior setback is 7 feet. Then the code references a side yard total of 14 feet. So is there a reason that you even need to say that the interior, a reason to make that statement? I think you could just remove that, because if you have a minimum of 7 feet on a side yard setback, it's going to be 14 no matter what. Just again, recommendation. Again, let's see, in 130B, so, okay. We get into parking spaces. Again, for R1 and R2, parking standards are provided relative to dwelling units and refers to, I am getting a little in the weeds on this, so you can stop me or just say, go on. It refers to one space and another off-street parking space behind the front setback line. So does your code mean that one on or off-street parking space plus a parking space behind the setback line is allowed? Or is it intended that both be off-street parking and one could be in the driveway and one behind the setback? Do you understand what I mean by that? Okay. Because right now, again, like the way the code's written is left to interpretation of, you're telling me I have to have 2 parking spaces, one of which has to be behind the front yard setback. So if I want to build a new house, I have to have 2 spaces, one of which would maybe be considered in the garage, so that's behind the front setback. But the other space, is it intended that that's in the driveway, so on my private property? Or can I consider if parking is allowed on the street in front of my house, can that be considered? There's no definition there. It doesn't say off-street or on-street. Again, in these code sections for all residential, it references hard surface driveways, but there's no definition of hard surface. So again, just providing that clarity, because I don't personally, I've worked in cities where gravel is not considered a hard surface, it's asphalt or concrete, but somebody else is going to consider gravel a hard surface. So again, having that definition. It also references these sections of this code are R2 and I think R3, references appropriate landscaping again, but does not provide for design regulations or specifics. So if you're going to, it's under the parking spaces for public church or for churches, public buildings, et cetera. This section here, appropriate landscaping shall screen such parking from adjoining properties. Doesn't tell me what that means. So you might think it's one single tree, you might think it's 30 trees and 10 bushes, I don't know. But again, having that definition is going to make everybody's life easier. So you don't have to try and interpret code when somebody comes to you for approval of something. Okay. I know I'm trying not to fall asleep. So section 405, 130B, 3D. And then subsequently, it's in subsequent R2 and R3, could be removed from the section and the subsequent codes, since it would be assumed that any additions could be made to existing structures so long as they meet the lot development standards for the district. So the way the code right here says, additions may be made laterally from the existing foundation line if said addition conforms to the side yard limits. Well, technically, if you have a front yard setback, you have a side yard setback, and say a rear yard setback, you should be able to build onto any part of your home as long as it still meets the setbacks. So it's just it's a redundancy in there. Okay. Moving along. So we're going to go to, let me find. I guess if I don't use it for a minute, it takes. So let's see. Nope, 150. Okay, so when we're in R2, and again, I apologize, this is just to try and get you all to understand of like how the code needs to be maybe looked at as far as making it functional. This 150A references, again, special and conditional uses. Like where here it says any use permitted in the R1 district, including special and reviewed. Again, just cleaning that up. So if it's going to say any conditional or permitted use in the R1 district, period, is a permitted use in the R2. You know, those are things to consider, just cleaning up that language. This code provides for bed and breakfast and appropriate parking spaces, but is this above and beyond the requirements of the residential parking spaces? So, you know, again, looking at that, the way you define bed and breakfasts, again, I would have to go back to your definitions, but they are generally, I live in the house and then I'm renting out rooms. So from a parking standard is I have the parking requirement for my house, and then how does that apply to a bed and breakfast? So again, just cleaning up that language. Again, the next comment 20, was again referencing the issues between conditional and reviewed. Section 405-200, so, I've got to go back out. Sorry, okay, so in R3, again, the question of, here, it just says all uses in R1 and R2 and doesn't say anything about conditional uses. But like in R2, where you allowed all R1 uses and all conditional uses, does that mean you can also do the conditional uses in R3? Again, just cleaning it up if that makes any sense. Take notes and then you can hammer me with questions here in a minute. Again, the multifamilies, it allows for signage, but the way it's written is 6 square feet is pretty small. That's a 2x3 sign for apartment complexes. You know, you traditionally think of a little bit larger sign. It doesn't have to be huge, but 6 square feet is pretty small. So again, having that separate sign code may help you clean up some of that to allow for larger signage. And again, getting into minimum lot size standards. The same question I had before, has regulations for the residential uses, but nothing for commercial. Sorry. Yes. Oh, yeah, for sure. I'm sorry. This is getting a little nitty gritty.
Break could be fine.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, sure.
All right.
And again, I should clarify, this is really just intended to show you where there's kind of holes in the code, and hopefully we can clean them up.
Right?
Do you guys want to continue?
Yeah,
Are you
let's-
ready? Okay, sorry.
Metalwork.
Yeah.
So we're to multifamily zoning.
Yep.
Again, I'm going to go through this a little bit quicker because this list, and Sally can provide you a copy of my comments, but it can get kind of into the nitty gritty. So I'm going to try and be a little more general. But in multifamily, the way the parking is written is a little difficult to apply to a multifamily development. So an apartment complex, if somebody new is to come in, it's a little bit difficult. So it's, again, looking at that, maybe cleaning that language up. The 250, sorry, let me see where I'm at. Oh, this doesn't let me just scroll through, sorry. I have to go back out to land use.
250 is somewhat vague.
Okay. Zoning. So, 260. So when we get into, so this is the commercial zoning district. When you get into permitted uses here, little bit of concerns regarding all residential uses are permitted in commercial districts. Generally speak from a zoning standpoint, mixed uses are oftentimes encouraged. Like in neighborhood or central business districts, you might see commercial on the first level, residential above, or multifamily being allowed in a commercial district. But you generally, and you can see maybe in in a neighborhood business, you might have a single family home here or there. You don't in a general commercial, so like you're up and down 32, the way the code is now is you could put a brand new single family residence right next to McDonald's. And I understand that some houses might exist there, but from a long-term zoning perspective, you don't traditionally see single family or two family intermixed with an auto repair business or outdoor storage or whatever it might be. So there are some considerations to think about. Do we want to allow any and all residential uses in the commercial zoning district? The next part is, sorry. It lists, so Codes 260 lists automobile parking lots is a permitted use. But Section 280A9, which is, I believe, your industrial district, lists parking lots and structures as a conditional use. And since there's no current definition of a parking lot, is there a difference between those two? And why would it be conditional in a more intensive zoning district if you're going to allow an automobile parking lot in commercial outright? So again, just things I come across. Again, moving forward, under special, you have special uses, conditional uses, confusion there. Like 280, which is your conditional uses section, lists a lot of uses that I would maybe consider permitted in a commercial district. If in like a general or a highway business district, if you created that separate than a neighborhood or downtown district. So things like a billiard or pool hall, amusement place, a movie theater, generally speaking, that's an indoor use. It might be big square footage and it might have a big parking lot, but there's not necessarily in a general commercial business district, I don't normally associate why that would be conditional. So things like that to think about. Also, additional design standards may be considered for specific uses if you're going to deem them conditional. So we just talked about it in the break. He had mentioned restaurants, and you do have drive-in restaurant, or you have drive-in, or drive-through of any type. Anything with a drive-through, I've seen in communities where that's a conditional use, but with that you have some additional restrictions. So it's going to say if you're going to do a drive-through, it's conditional. So we want it to come to us, and it's going to have to go to the Board of Aldermen. But you have some minimum standards that have to be met, because the example that I gave and I apologize, I forgot your name, but as an example for a drive-through restaurant, I've seen in codes, it's conditional, but it says per drive-through lane with a sign. So, you know, you maybe have one drive-through window, but per drive-through sign. So you have to have a minimum example of 4 stacking spaces, and those stacking spaces have to be a minimum of 10 feet by 20 feet in length. So that if you have that drive-through restaurant come in and it's a tight piece of property and they can't provide those 4 stacking spaces, then maybe that's not the best location for that drive-through business. So those are things, again, to consider. Moving forward, let's see. Again, section 290, which talks about lot development. There's no minimum lot size requirement. Again, as I mentioned, I can see maybe that being the case in a central business district, or a neighborhood district where you have a lot of historic buildings with 0-foot setbacks. But in a general commercial district, you know, you may want to consider, even if you don't have the setback, that maybe you have buffer requirements from residential, or, you know, if you have a commercial piece of general commercial next to a residential, that you provide some type of buffer. Just things to consider. The other part to that is the next part then is it talks about the parking. So, you know, that continues to be a question mark. So, again, pulling the parking regulations out of each zoning district and having that be one code section. Because, as an example, I think, you know, this has some restrictions, but then it's not also duplicated in the next code section. So, again, just trying to make sure that you make it as easy as possible to not only interpret, but for, say, the general public or developer to come in and look at your code, they know exactly what they're going to have to do to build in your city. Again, this code references building and fire codes, but lists no parking requirements for commercial businesses within the 3 blocks. You know, the one thing, when we talked about setback regulations, and in historic districts, I know there are provisions in many a building code for historic buildings. But I know, and you know, depending on the, it's International Building Code, so whatever IBC year you're using, there's oftentimes, you might not have a building setback, but if you have a building within less than 5 feet of a property line, your fire code kicks in and it says you have to have a firewall. So those are things like maybe you can, you know, in those bigger zoning districts you consider, because looking at the code, I think, oh, I can build to my property line, and then I find out I have that additional expense of a firewall or sprinklers or whatever, and I don't know how far you guys go with that, but I know those are things that have come up in other communities. In this section of code as well, the parking space regulations you do provide for reference gross square footage, and or gross floor area. I will say that sometimes, like in retail businesses, so in your commercial district right now, I'm going to use Walmart as an example. You have to provide 1 parking space for each 150 square feet of gross floor area. That is the entire building. That does not take out stairwells. That does not take out bathroom spaces. That does not take out offices for the managers or the, you know, staff area or storage, where there's no reason to generate a parking space requirement for storage areas. Like, when you consider making amendments to the code and you consider parking regulations, you may want to consider what's called floor area, not gross floor area. So it's like your net, and then you define, what does that net floor area mean? It means no stairwells, no storage areas, things like that. So you don't end up with, you know, a business that has 1,000 more parking spaces than they need. Just a recommendation. 290A3, again, this in commercial does allow for an opaque ornamental fence or wall, or a dense evergreen hedge, not less than 5 feet, but not more than 6 feet in height. So I back up. You do have a buffer kind of requirement. there's no setback or yard space requirement from commercial to residential, but you either have to have an ornamental fence or you have to have a hedge. I don't know why you would limit it to 6 feet tall, but that's just me. Also, no definition of opaque ornamental fence. So again, I see that and I think a site-proof wood fence or a vinyl fence, but to somebody else that might mean a slatted chain link fence with that netting, and that's not always visually appealing. So, and or the netting gets torn and then it's not site-proof, so definitions matter. There's also no definition of what a public drive is. Hold on. Sorry, so that code section, so it says whenever any commercial district parking or public drive adjoins a residential zone, there's no definition of what a public drive is. So again, clearing that up. Section 290A4, this is the first time where it references a C1 neighborhood business district in the commercial district, but you don't have a C1 district anywhere. So I don't know where that came from. The A41A, again, minimum lot size comment, and we talked about that already. You have lot size standards and setback standards for residential, but not for commercial. But you allow residential in commercial. So do the residences in a commercial district, as it is now, have setbacks that they have to follow and or lot size minimums that they have to follow when a commercial business does not, if it was to go on the same piece of property? So again, questions. So again, in that same, there's the no minimum. So you could have, again, by allowing those R1 uses, you could have a single family home with a 7-foot side yard setback and a commercial use on the adjacent property line. It's a little bit of incongruous inconsistencies. Continuing on, this B4A2B, height regulations. Hold on, I lost my spot. B4, is that right? A. Sorry, I lost my spot for a moment. 290. 2B. Okay, so I apologize. It provides a setback. So this is another thing. There's a minimum minimum street side setback. So if you're on a corner, the side of your building that's facing this one side of the street that doesn't have, it's not the main entrance, has a 7-foot setback, but constructed on property henceforth annexed into the city of Salem and zoned commercial. Doesn't say when it had to have been annexed. And if, so again, just, one, when was that annex established? Why is it just for annexed property, et cetera? Sorry, I got lost for a moment. Oh, I'm on my next page. Again, just noting that, it would be easier if setbacks applied to the whole district, not just specific properties, and again, opens you up to interpretation issues that you don't want to deal with. Again, provides for height regulations and only permits residences at a height equal to the associated residential district. But again, keeping in the design of consistency in commercial areas, if a single or two-family home was acceptable in an actual commercial district, it would make sense that it would be designed consistent with the facades and frontages and heights of their commercial neighbors. So if you as a group and if the city board of aldermen said, okay, we still want to allow single-family homes in the commercial district, it would make sense that maybe you could, you see those modern homes, you could have a 60-foot tall house, which would be crazy and super expensive, but, like if you think about if you only have one zoning district, especially downtown, if somebody's going to renovate that whole structure as a single-family residence, you don't have a 25-foot home and then a 60-foot commercial building and then a 25-foot home. And then it's just, again, things to think about. The human scale gets off when you have that kind of change. Moving forward, so if we get into the sign regulations that are provided, it does not address billboards or any restrictions on such signage. So off-site signage is generally what it's called. You have freestanding off-premise and on-premise signs are regulated all the same. Billboards can be a hot button item, but it is something to consider. If you have no regulations that limit it or allow for it, or I should say restrict it in size, then you can end up with, have you ever been to Springfield, Missouri? They have regulations now, but like their sign code is crazy because they have, ginormous signs up and down. And, if you think about the scale of Salem, it's, again, providing for those regulations allows you to make sure they're in the correct location, that you don't have a billboard on 5 consecutive properties. Maybe there's some distance between them if you want to allow them at all. It's just thinking about what kind of signs you permit. Off-site signage in general can sometimes be a problem if you don't, if you allow off-premise, if right now you allow off-premise signage without a clear definition. If I own my car dealership in the middle of the block, but I want to put a sign on the corner lot, there's not a whole lot of things to prohibit me from doing that, so you can end up with multiple signs. The other part to that with sign regulations, from the way I read it, it doesn't appear that the sign code allows for monument-style signs. So what that generally means, again, is like the ground-based, has maybe like the nice brick or stone base, and then it's like it's a rectangular sign or whatever, but it's ground-mounted, if you will. The code really refers to like pole signs. And so, thinking about what the aesthetic intent is of the city, on a road like 32, it makes sense that you would allow for monument and or pole signs because the speed is higher. But up and down Main Street or 19, it doesn't always necessitate a pole sign or large signage because you're not supposed to be driving, at high rates of speed. So it's, again, things to consider. If you continue on, 360, let's see, where am I at? I've got to go back out. 405.360, which I think gets into the industrial district. So your permitted uses in the industrial zoning district reference any non-residential use permitted in the C2 district, but there's no C2 district established in the code. It also notes amusement parks, circuses, et cetera, are permitted upon approval of the Planning Commission. So does that not make it a conditional use instead, or is that a reviewed use? I don't know. Generally speaking, if it's a permitted use, it's permitted, and as long as it abides by the setbacks, the other design codes established for that district, it doesn't require special approval. So again, just asking that question. It lists Code 380 under conditional uses of the industrial district. Lists generally a conditional use in an industrial district is a pretty intensive industrial use. It's things like acid manufacturers or explosive. So why riding stables? Why would a riding stable be considered? I don't know. To me, that's an agricultural use, not an industrial use. So it should maybe be permitted in ag and not listed anywhere in industrial. But that's, again, just a question. Excuse me.
Smell and noise. But that's agricultural still.
do,
We didn't have an agricultural zone, so where would it go? Or did we? In code we do not. Oh.
What? Oh, the ag. Yeah, you do have an ag. So let's see. Also, this last one, number 8, other similar uses. Generally speaking, and again, this is general. 1, that's a pretty big interpretation. 2, in zoning codes, generally speaking, I will say it again, I am not a land use attorney. But generally in zoning codes, if it is not specifically permitted, it is prohibited unless it is allowed for as conditional or something else. So opening it up to any other similar use, I mean, I can see where that's applicable. Those heavy duty, sewage, bulk storage of dangerous things would be conditional. But that also, you have riding stables or ag use in there. So would a pig farm? I mean, I don't know. I mean, I'm trying to pick an annoying use, but there's maybe some things that you don't want in the city limits of the city of Salem. That can be left to the county. Just a thought. Or you don't care. It's up to you, but it's a question mark. Let me see. Sorry, I got a little lost on my notes. So under section 390, this gets into lot development. Again, it does not provide for minimum lot sizes or screening requirements, especially adjacent to residential areas. This is in your industrial zoning. It's recommended that these be considered. It also does not provide regulations for parking spaces of commercial uses within the industrial district. So what I said before, the commercial zoning district had some parking space regulations that are not then technically carried over to industrial. So, I'm going to say generally you apply those if somebody puts a commercial use in the industrial zoning, but it's not expressly listed. So somebody could maybe make the argument, well, I don't have any parking regulations, so you can't make me put in that 10 spaces or whatever. Section 405, okay, so now we're going to go to the ag zoning that's in the code. And I promise I'm almost done. So in the ag zoning, it allows for single-family dwellings not connected to farms. However, if it's the intent to allow large acreage residential homes, then why would it not just be zoned R1? You have a minimum lot size. It doesn't have a maximum lot size. So if you want to have an R1 use, if you want to have an R1 use with no farm associated, why does it need to be zoned ag? Excuse me. Also, it appears, again, the code also appears to address only minimum standards for residential uses. Is there a reason that maybe the ag district would not have a larger lot size requirement? So again, it has lot size requirements if you have a residential use in ag, but if it's an expressly an ag use, there's no lot size requirement for I'm gonna keep my farm. I wanna be in the city limits, but I have a farm. There's no, it has to be an acre minimum or 5 acres minimum or something like that. I could have a 5,000 square foot lot and have a farm. I don't know. There's no restriction on that. So it's just, again, another question. And not that anybody would ever come into the city in an ag zoning and want to put a farm on a 5,000 square foot lot, but technically they could right now. Yeah, yes. Excuse me. This code, the ag code, does not provide parking signage or other standards like it does in the commercial districts. So again, if you had those separate codes, you wouldn't have to worry about it. And then my last comment, and again, everything I looked at, I did not read every single use in these zoning districts because that would have been a lot longer list, is noting that a good non-conforming building use and regulation clause in your code builds in flexibility to have what you have in a city, but to allow you to adopt a new zoning map consistent with your regulations and to update the codes. Because you can see in the codes, it tells you, this was first created in November 94, and it was amended in 2011. The history tells you, and when a code section is updated, it's going to tell you the date. So again, if you as a citizen have a piece of property and it's got a commercial business on it, and the city adopts a zoning map and says, long-term, we really think this is multifamily, R3 zoning, that's not going to say that you have to immediately go out and change your property. What those non-conforming clauses or grandfather clauses generally will say, and every city's is different, but something like if a property sits abandoned or unused for more than 1 calendar or 1 year, then anything new in that property is required to be, from a use perspective, required to meet code. If it's a building that's demolished by an act of God or whatever it might be, you know, a tree falls on it, as long as you, like the way codes sometimes can be written is as long as you undertake a building permit within 6 months and the work is completed well within a year of said act of God, you know, a tornado comes through, you can put back what you had before, meeting, you know, you're putting that house back on that setback in a commercial zone, or you're putting that auto repair place back that's in the historic part of town with a 0-foot setback, but you're putting back exactly what you had, so that as long as you do it and say it got destroyed by a tornado, you do it within a good amount of time, you don't let it sit, then you can do what you did before. It's when it goes to change is that the new codes kick in. And that, I think, is important to note, because if you have a strong nonconformity clause adopted before you do any zoning or code changes, you can tell your citizens, look, we're not coming in and telling you you're going to have to change everything about your property immediately. It's if you let it sit abandoned, or say you're in a commercial, we change our commercial code for general commercial that single-family residences aren't permitted, and you have a single-family residence in a general commercial district, say on 32. It can stay residential until, you know, Sam's Club comes in and says, we are buying 5 properties and we want to build a Sam's Club. What can't happen is that then Sam's Club goes, I'm going to leave, and you tear that Sam's Club down and you can't put a house back on that spot. But it's, again, it can stay there as long as it remains as is, if that makes sense. So that is important to have. Now, I have seen communities come through and say, nope, we're going to put a sunset on it, and everybody has to come into conformity in 15, 20 years. I don't think that's the best idea, because then in 15 and 20 years, you are dealing with a bunch of fights. And it's not to say that you could have gone through every single legal requirement that you were required to do to adopt that code and adopt that zoning, but you're still going to end up with a fight, you know, when that code or that sunset, or that code sunsets. So my recommendation is, if you think about adopting that, it's only upon vacancy of a year or something like that, or 6 months, and it's only upon change of use to conform. It is not a hard and fast, in 2050, everything in the city is going to come into compliance. That's not worked well for most communities. So I know it's a lot, but those are some overarching things. Definitions matter. Through and through, they matter. How you word it, saying and is different than saying or. So I've been involved with court cases where, or you know, it hasn't gone to court yet, they threatened to sue because they said, no, the code says or. Well, city staff's been interpreting it as and. Well, then push comes to shove, no, it says or. We can't make you do this and this, it's this or this. And even 50 people before them have done it the way we've asked them to, but that one person comes in and argues. Cleaning up the zoning codes to match your map, cleaning up the reviewed conditional special. I really think you have permitted uses and conditional uses, or special uses, whatever you want to call them, but you do not have reviewed conditional and special. I think that's too confusing for people. Having a good non-conformity clause, and then separately within your zoning code, having a parking code, a sign code, and considering some aesthetic and or setback lot size regulations for some of your districts. It's a lot of work, and it can take a lot of time. So I don't come to you with these ideas and suggestions and think that, you're going to do it in 6 months. It's my suggestion of a timing consideration is that you deal with the map first. No, I take that back. You deal with your code first, and then you adopt the map. Because your code is already incongruous with your map. So saying R1, R2, R3, if I'm looking at this map, or the map you have, there's already inconsistencies there. So getting the wording cleaned up, building in that nonconformity clause, getting that in place, so that when you come to the public and you say, we want to zone this neighborhood business or we want to zone this general commercial district, they are going to know what that means. And then they're going to know, is my piece of property going to be permitted as is? Is it considered non-conforming, whether it's a non-conforming use or it's a non-conforming lot size? Again, the last community I worked for, we had R1 zoning is traditionally your most prevalent zoning in a city, single family. We had several historic districts, and those properties were only 50 feet by 100, maybe 50 by 120, maybe less. And by the zoning district, they were non-conforming because it required, I think, a 60 or 70-foot wide lot. So nobody, it's forever and always, unless somebody comes in and consolidates two properties, it's always going to be a non-conforming lot size. But as long as somebody's not trying to build an addition that's going to violate the setbacks, it's not an issue. So those are things that I think you need to take a look at. So code first, map second, so when people see they're going to zone my property X, that's what X means, versus they're going to zone my property X, that doesn't exist in the code right now, or they're going to zone my property X, and it says I can do this now, but then the code changes and I can't do it later. I do think that's, from a time frame perspective, that's probably the most important thing, process-wise. And it's really to get the city functional so that I do think long-term, it saves a lot of headache. Now, I will say, too, and I talked to Sally about this, too, I do think the city needs a comprehensive plan. Traditionally, a comprehensive plan update would come first, and then you establish a future land use map, kind of, and then you use that to say, okay, this is what we want the city to look like. Sorry, I'm warm. Yeah, it talks about everything, from infrastructure to public works to parks. It talks about everything. Traditionally, that comes first. And like I showed you in state statute, if you're going to have zoning, you're supposed to have a comprehensive plan. That plan drives all decision making. So in that comp plan, if you have a future land use map, it's very general. If it says it's going to be commercial, and then your zoning map says it's neighborhood business or it's general commercial, and somebody comes in and goes, no, I want to zone it R1, and you've gone through the public process, the city or the Board of Aldermen is going to say, well, through this public process, we identified long-term that this property is commercial, that it's not going to be single family. So we're going to deny that request. And then you have standing to deny that request. That's just a rough example. So, I mean, you can to get yourself functioning, you can look at the code and then look at the map. You could also try and do a comp plan and the code changes at the same time and then come back and adopt the map based on the comp plan. There's a lot of things to consider. I will say, and I don't know if the funding is still available because grants have been cut left and right at a federal level, but there is a program. You are a part of the Delta Regional Authority, correct? There are some, we've submitted applications for Cuba and Potosi as well to do a comp plan. There potentially are some funding mechanisms to fund a comp plan. That's a whole different animal. But it's just something else to consider for the long term, to make sure the city, I will tell you, and I don't know if you feel this way, but working in 8 counties with 32-ish cities, give or 36 cities, Salem makes a list of things to do, and they go out and they get things done. Before I started, I've only been there, it'll be 9 years in September. But everything I've seen, you know, you've done strategic planning, and you went back in 4 years and said, hey, we met all those to-do lists. We need to do this again. So Salem has a lot of people that are ready to make change and get things done. And I will give a lot of kudos to Salem. We've done some other plans with active transportation, and of all the communities I work with, you guys have a lot of very invested people that want to see positive things for the community. And so I totally think it's possible for you to get things done, whatever order you choose to do it. I do think that zoning map is maybe the last piece. Even though we think it's the first piece, I think you have to have the stuff on the page clarified before you try to apply a new code to a piece of property, so that somebody can come in and look at it and say, okay, this is what I can or can't do. These are my setbacks. Am I conforming? Am I not? What does that mean? Yeah.
When I said that the comp plan talks about the values, I want to back up to that just a second. Specifically, when we're talking about things like lot size, density, those types of things in your community, that's where your comp plan sets that standard, because it talks about what does the community hold as valuable. Are we still a very agricultural type of community who wants larger open space for our residential areas, larger lot sizes? It's going to talk about those types of things, and that will help then inform our zoning codes and our zoning map down the road. So it talks about all of those things. Like if Salem is no longer the agricultural hub that maybe it used to be for the area, then we want to look at what's a larger density, more dense lot development, smaller lot sizes. Does that make sense? How that would
Yeah, I mean, generally speaking, a comprehensive plan will identify policy. It doesn't set the regulations, but it'll say, you know, we think we need to have, it'll identify future land use maps. So we want this to be low density. We want this to be higher density residential. We think it'll generalize commercial, it'll generalize industrial, but it does provide kind of a forward movement, so that, you know, if you, like she said, is Salem becoming more urban? Is it becoming less rural? In which case, yeah. Yeah, and it involves, there's a lot of public involvement in that planning process. So it's not an insular, there's not decisions, there's being made just by a few people. And again, it covers everything. We talk, excuse me, it talks about, do you have enough water capacity to accommodate new development? You maybe would identify growth areas. So you're not looking to go out and annex a bunch of property, but maybe you look at the perimeter of Salem and what do you think should happen in the next 10, 20, 30 years? If we're going to have growth, where do we think it should happen? Can the streets accommodate development? It's a more in-depth process. We have done them. There are lots of planning firms that do them too. They are not cheap to do. They are usually at least a year to 18 months to do that. So it's a time frame commitment. Like I said, we're doing one for the city of Herman. Theirs is a condensed 10-year comp plan right now. We've had a lot of great public involvement, and so, that one isn't quite setting so much policy as it is. It's really, a comp plan is more identifying the goals you want to have for infrastructure, for land use, for housing, and then coming up with those kind of action items of how can you meet that, and then your code then reflects those goals and actions. So it is something else to consider. Again, the comments that I made and sent to the city and just went over, those are, for the most part, generalized to say, I think if a Joe citizen came in and wanted to do something, they would not understand how to do it based on X, Y, and Z, So there's a million ways that you could approach it. I do think especially looking at a citywide zoning map change, that maybe that's, you know, the kind of the last step. But that's my opinion. Questions, please ask. I've got a microphone. Some of you have microphones. Ask away.
You guys' microphones are live, you may have to switch it on.
Check.
Yep,
It sounds
I
like
can
it's
hear it.
working. Okay. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can be short, don't worry. All right, signage and parking.
Yeah.
Are these going to be new articles that we need or sections under certain places?
It
What
would
you-
generally, just you would have within your land use chapter, you would have maybe.
So it'd just be another chapter,
would-
zoning
yeah, it would
regulations,
be
sign
like-
regulations, and
Like
parking
chapter
regulations?
430 or something,
Okay.
whatever, however you want to number them. But yeah, you would have a separate, it would all be within zoning. It would just be,
Okay. That's what I was wondering. I was just wondering where that would kind of fall.
yeah, I mean, I would still keep it in the zoning code. It would just be its own section. So again, yeah, it's not sprinkled throughout. You can go straight to the parking regulations and any park. I mean, the only time you might have a specified parking restriction would be if, say, like if you even wanted to, but it should be in the parking code. But in the conditional uses, you know, like.
Sure.
But ideally, again, you have it all in one place, so you can go look for it. Same with signage. It's its own separate code. It talks about all the different types of signage. I'm going to look up just to give you an idea of what that could look like. And huh? Yeah. So just as an example. Now, I will tell you, they are way more restrictive than Salem probably will ever need to be, but, whoops, I meant to put zoning code. And in fact, they have updated their code since I've left, so I used to be able to tell you, somebody would be like, what's the step? I'd be like, it's 400.230 AB or A2. But, you know, just as a reference, you know, they have tree preservation section. I mean, it gets
Okay.
you can get all kinds, but like sign regulations, it's
Okay, so it's another.
its own, and you have things that are exempt. You have definitions, height. That's one thing too, and I didn't mention it, but setbacks, height measurements, sometimes it's good to have graphics. So when you're talking about like what, you know,
Oh,
what
nice.
is the sign? Like, that's an example of a monument sign, but how do I measure height? You know, those are things that sometimes including those can be helpful too. Just as an example. Other questions? Yes?
I'm curious to what you've seen in other communities. Of course, I've preached to Sally for a long time that we are a bedroom community primarily for Rollin and
Sure.
St. James, which I continue to believe. But like a lot of communities around, we're short on housing. And we're short on dollars in Dent County also. So I'm curious if you've seen any kind of restrictions or zoning that's been addressed as far as tiny houses, or maybe a little step above tiny houses, but still small houses.
So I think there are multiple ways you can address it. If you are looking at something, like we talked about, more dense housing developments, to where you maybe have multiple tiny houses in close proximity, then, you know, maybe that's a section, you know, a list of permitted uses in your multifamilies. I don't know where, depending on where you would want to allow them. But let's say, for the sake of this discussion, multifamily or single-family lots. That maybe, you know, you have restrictions, just regulations just for tiny homes, or you, yeah, there's a whole, the American Planning Association has whole documents written about, talking about tiny houses, and, you know, you can set minimum lot size requirements. You can completely remove some communities. historically have had established a minimum square footage for houses in their single-family zoning, you could just get rid of that. And to say, you know, if it meets the setbacks, it meets the lot size requirements, or whatever you want it to do, but you have no, you know, it meets the definition of a single-family residence, a dwelling unit, which is traditionally a place to sleep, a place to eat, and a place to use the restroom, then, you know, if you removed that square footage requirement, there's nothing to stop you from building a 500 square foot house. But that is something the city, you know, wants to consider. If they want to do it like a conditional use in a single family where it's either, you know, it allows for the board and the community or the Board of Aldermen and the Planning and Zoning Commission to consider if people want to do a tiny house, but they want to do several of them, then here are some minimum standards we want that development to meet, but we're going to allow it in single family, or we're going to allow it in multifamily. So yeah, there's a variety of ways you can do it. I know there is a tiny house community. Now this is specific to, it's developed almost like a mobile home park with some standards on like requiring skirting and things like that, because they're not on, this specific one isn't on permanent foundation, but it allows for, you know, it has, they have like a common building out front, and so there's laundry service there, and there's a meeting room, so the residents, you know, it's almost like an apartment complex, except instead of buildings with 4, 5, 6 units in them, it's single unit buildings and then a community building. So there's really ways, if the community has the will to do that, you can put it into a code. It's not, there's all kinds of ways you could look at it. If you want the city officials to just say, yeah, if you're gonna come in, most of the time in most communities, if you're just gonna build a single family house on a lot and it meets all the setbacks and standards, it doesn't have to come to any special board for approval. So if you didn't want to bother with that and you wanted to write into the code with enough regulation to say if they meet X, Y, and Z, they can just go and get their building permit, you can do that. Or you can make it to where they have to, you know, they have to come before the board so you can look at it. It really is up to the community. But I think if the community has the will to allow for them, there's certainly the ability to do so. If you want to just allow it willy-nilly, if you want to put restrictions on it, it's up to the community to decide. Other questions? It's a lot. I'm sorry. Yes.
Other communities and how you've seen things deal with things like automobile service shops. So I'm going to ask that question. We've had that kind of come up with us here.
Yeah.
Because things weren't clear. A lot of things got misconstrued. How are those typically handled? Because like there's typically even in our small town, I think we have 7 service shops, you know, in our town. They are producing some sort of hazardous waste. However, they are selling stuff. There's different variations of that. We have an oil change shop that's in a commercial district. We have tire change shops in different districts, commercial and industrial zones. They do produce, they do make some noise and things like that, but how are those kind of things handled? Because there's one it's a service shop, but it's attached to a commercial lot where they sell vehicles.
Yeah.
There's one that's just oil changes and service. There's ones that are tires and not selling any vehicles or doing how are those kind of things handled?
So again, it depends on the will of the community, but like as an example, and I'm just using St. Charles as an example because that's what I know. For an example, in a general commercial district, not neighborhood commercial, but a general commercial, like up and down 32, they allow motor vehicle repair, but wrecked, disabled, and inoperable vehicles aren't allowed to be parked outside from or stored anywhere on the property for more than 30 days. So they're trying to restrict unappealing-looking vehicles. Permitted uses, again, like as in other parts, they don't allow outdoor storage of tires. It has to be indoors. Again, not that everybody, or there's screening and buffer requirements. Conditional uses,
Okay.
I believe a lot of times I've seen, like here, motor vehicle sales and rental, new and used temporary motor vehicle storage. It's a conditional use with additional regulations that apply to it. So before you can even go to P&Z or City Council or Board of Aldermen, you have to be able to meet all of those standards, and then you take your proposal forward. So, I mean, a lot of places, I've seen that be conditional. Really, the outdoor storage aspect, anything related to outdoor storage, I have traditionally seen is conditional, and or it has to be screened from view of the street, or, you know, there's buffer requirements if it's adjacent to residential, across the board, no matter, you know, like, no matter the type of storage, with the exception of, like, if you're in heavy industrial, then, you know, there's maybe not screening requirements. But generally speaking, anything like that, it doesn't allow you to park, you know, doesn't allow you to start a junkyard, so you have all these inoperable vehicles sitting on your property for 30-plus days. That is a common thing I've seen.
Okay.
If I may, the biggest problem we've had with that kind of stuff all along is that we only had one definition for commercial.
Yep.
And it was the more neighborhood downtown commercial,
Yep.
not highway type commercial. So this is what, you know, some of these changes
It's-
could be about to more delineate what's your downtown, you know, shops and.
Yeah, what's
storefronts
commercial versus neighborhood business?
compared to what you're, when you're walking or having the Walmart or the bigger.
Yeah. Some of the things we were talking about with even our last meeting. Size requirements.
I've seen in different communities handle it differently, but I have seen where you have it, from a definitions perspective, it's like two different definitions. You have like general auto repair, and, you know, that's kind of defined as like oil changes, minor repair, but once you get into like body repair and heavy machinery, heavy equipment, then that tends to be either conditional and or in an industrial district. You know, you always have, and I think I'm guessing, because I did not get into codes outside of the zoning district. So noise ordinances come into play. So regardless of what the zoning is, you always have a noise ordinance. A lot of communities also have nuisance codes. So, you know, your grass you can't be too tall, or, you know, you can't have a junk vehicle, trash, whatever. Those apply to the maintenance and the aesthetics of a property, but they're not in the zoning code. So, you know, I will say some communities also have lighting restrictions, or like when you submit a site plan for a new building, in some places, not everywhere, you have to submit a lighting plan, or your engineer has to state, you know, it's not going to shine light on more than X candle or wattage on adjacent properties. So the big developments that have these really tall lights with super LEDs, you know, and I have seen where some of these developments, you know, they get lighter and brighter, and sometimes you end up with issues of, hey, so-and-so's light shining on my property, especially near residential, that can be a problem. And if you can easily say, hey, the such and such code says can't shine directly on an adjacent property, can you turn that light? And it's just a matter of them, you know, moving.
Again, like I said, community will, I know in my previous community, we had a car dealership who decided it was a great marketing tool to get the big searchlights
Yeah,
and shine those
I
up.
mean, I've seen those prohibited in a lot of places, but, so, yeah, again, it's up to the community. I am here to tell you what my experience is, but I cannot tell you that that's what's good for Salem. But yeah, I mean, those are things like Sally said, you can prohibit searchlights, or prohibit them in certain zoning districts. people, a lot of people sometimes, I mean, Missouri is a very pro-property rights state. It is. I mean, a lot of the Midwest is. But that doesn't mean that you can't put into place some regulations to protect the aesthetic and to enhance what Salem is and has. You know, I will say the biggest thing in any project, whether it's infrastructure or zoning or whatever, it's maintenance. So maintaining what you have, you always have to consider, and enforcing what you have. Because if you have inconsistent enforcement, once you adopt those new codes, you've got to be able to enforce them and have the support of the council, or the Board of Aldermen, and have the support of the Planning and Zoning Commission and, you know, staff members to say, you know, I know some communities don't allow off-street parking to be on gravel or on the grass. And, you know, if you adopt something like that, and you say you allow it now, there's no restriction, you know, I'm gonna park my truck in my front yard and I don't care. And then you adopt something like that, sometimes you have to, there's education involved, and there's maybe a grace period involved, and it's not an easy task, and I commend you all for even considering, you know, making these changes, but I do think there's some real clarifications that need to happen regardless. Like, you could, at a bare minimum, you could clarify a few things in your code and make your life easier. Anything else?
Can I email you questions
Yeah,
later?
absolutely. I mean,
I don't want
again,
to take up too much time
no,
here,
you're
so,
fine.
yeah.
You know, I don't get to do zoning stuff a lot. I mean, like, I'm working on, I deal with transportation planning, economic development. I do some comp plan stuff. We do active I mean, I'm doing a wide variety of things, but this is kind of my bread and butter, is what I did before I moved back to St. James and got into regional planning. And sometimes I miss it. So when I got the chance to do this, I was like, oh, I'm excited. So yeah, ask me any questions. I don't care.
Okay.
For this group and for the Board of Aldermen, I think the first and foremost, you need to decide process. Do we want to try to do a comp plan first while we work on code edit recommendations? You know, the thought process is,
Yeah.
if you took, in probably real form, if you took a minimum of 12 months, maximum of 18 months, so, you know, a year to year and a half, you could do a comprehensive plan in that time frame while you're also working on what you want your code to say. So you don't have to adopt the code, but you could be working on the language and what you want to look like, and you could have workshop upon workshop to edit it and make changes. And you give, you know, in conjunction with the comp plan, you're allowing the public to be involved and have that public buy-in, so that once you adopt things, you don't have people going, oh, wait a second, what's this? Again, you know, I'll say, to even be more generous, a year to 2 year process to maybe start that comp plan and do your zoning, your code edits. Because you know, like, the idea would be that the city would come up with a first draft, and then you would have a workshop, and the Board of Aldermen and staff and the public has a chance to look at it. And you go, I don't like this, and this needs to change. I mean, and you could do that till you're blue in the face while you're doing the comp plan stuff, and then you adopt the comp plan, and then you have the zoning code changes right after, and then you look at the map. Because again, I think as much as you want the map to get fixed, I think it's difficult to try to tell somebody that their zoning's potentially going to change without having exactly what it's going to look like in place.
So on that note, I won't say it was the last one or the most recent one, but the only comp plan that I've seen, and I told Ann this, I'll do this little confession here, was done in the 60s. And at the moment, I can't put my hands on it. So I saw it, and then it was set aside to be put where we could find it, and I can't put my hands on it. But that's the only one I've seen
I will look in our library. We kind of keep a library at work of all the communities and see if I find anything. You have definitely done strategic planning, but you have not done a comp plan that I am aware of in a long time. You are not alone. You know, like I said, I think Herman's last was 1999, and even though they have one from 1999, it is not sufficient in any way, shape, or form. So it's starting from what you would essentially be scratch is not the end of the world. It is very common. And again, that comp plan does not have to be the most like nitpicky. I mean, it can be pretty generalized. It's more of like it's a catalog of what you have, what you can accommodate, where you see growth, and some general provisions for, you know, like we have water, we are, you know, our wells and our water treatment facility can handle, I don't even know this, 100,000, I mean, I know that's nothing, but 100,000 gallons. And right now, we consistently use 80,000 gallons. So we have a capacity, you know, a surplus of 20,000. Well, that could only, you know, accommodate X number of more businesses and residences. So if we want to grow or we want new businesses, we've got to expand our water capacity to, you know, X number by 2050 or something. You know, that's the kind of things that the comp plan looks at. An engineer is usually involved. You have a planning partner, and then you know, an engineer is usually involved to help come up with some of those numbers. But yeah, I mean, it's a 30,000-foot view of the city and what you can do and what you have, and then it talks about where you want to go in the next 20 years. I will preface this. So comp plans are not cheap, and you know, nobody wants to rain on anybody's parade. The one we are doing for Herman, they are not in the DRA. That one is a 10-year outlook, and it's $40,000. The ones we have put in proposals for, and we run cheaper. I'm not advocating for us, but we can do that. The proposals we put together with the work of an engineer to do a capital improvement program along with the comp plan for the full kit and caboodle, those have been 150,000 for some of the communities. Rolla, I think they did, their comp plan update was like 300,000. You can take it as far as you want to go, but they're not cheap. They're not $10,000, you know, plans. So that's something you have to plan for too. Do we have the money to do it? There potentially is or was a grant available. I don't know if it still exists because so many things have been cut federally. We still have not heard back from Potosi or Cuba's applications, and those were put in a year and a half ago. So, I don't know. But that if that money still exists, there's potential that it could help offset some of the costs to do comp plans for the city of Salem, because you are in that development district. I am always available to answer questions. Again, I'm at MRPC. That's my contact info, and I realize there's a typo, but my extension is 105, not 10T. Again, I will always do my best to answer, and if I don't know the answer, I will try to find somebody that can help you. And I really appreciate the opportunity. Like I said, it's been fun for me because that's something I don't get to do a lot. Again, you guys, I know you have a lot of people, not just at the city level, but in the community that are really willing to step up and get things done. And so I know you guys will make it through this. Maybe not so easy, but you'll make it through and get it done. So, thank you.
Thank you, thank you. Good job, Ann.
It's a lot.